Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm very happy to be again here at this very interesting conference. And I'm super happy, also very, say, proud to have the chance to present the talk of Bruno Frey, professor in Zurich and Basel. He will be telling us about one of his new provocative ideas about over-tourism and way to solve what has become quite an issue in our lives. The presentation of Bruno is recorded, so we will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. I will ask you to write your questions in on the form on the website, but please try to keep them short so that it will be easier for me to read them and for Bruno to answer them. Sorry. See you in a moment. Bye.
Overtourism is a totally new term, which was invented only some years ago. It means that there are enormous number of people visiting a site as tourists. In the year 2010, so before the pandemic, there were 500 million people as tourists. And many sites are overcrowded. There is an official measurement saying that there are 98 destinations all over the world that are overcrowded. However, here we speak about cultural overtourism. And one over-touristic is the Mount Everest. You see here a picture showing how totally overcrowded this highest mountain in the world is when the weather is good. Actually, 4 people died because there were so many people on the Mount Everest that they pushed each other down and people died. But cultural over-tourism is also very much existing. For instance, in the Museum of the Louvre, there are 10.2 million visitors per year. Or in the Vatican, about 7 million, and in the Tate and in the British Museum, about 6 million people. So as cultural tourists, all this, of course, before the pandemic. Now, the picture you see shows the quintessential city in which there is much over-tourism. There are up to 95,000 visitors per day at some days. But there are other cities like that, Florence or Rome, Amsterdam, Barcelona, Prague, or Lucerne in Switzerland. But particularly smaller cities such as Dubrovnik or Colmar in France or Mont-Saint-Michel also heavily over-touristic. Outside Europe, there are, of course, also cultural, over-touristic places, such as here, the picture of the Great Wall, where there are thousands of people totally overwhelming the site. There is, of course, in Peru, Chichen Itza, in Mexico, Machu Picchu in Peru, Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and the Taj Mahal in India, where there are 70,000 people some days visiting the Taj Mahal. One important aspect are the cruise ships. Today they have sometimes 5,000 passengers, but in the future there will be more, even 8,000 or 10,000 people. Here is a picture showing how much such a large cruise ship dominates the Giudecca Canal in Venice. I think it is rather terrible sea. Several negative effects of cultural over-tourism is overcrowding. Here you see people in front of the famous Mona Lisa by Da Vinci in the Louvre. Another aspect is that the local population is more or less diminishing. For instance, Venice had something like 200,000 inhabitants in the past. Now it has 30 to 40,000 inhabitants, so that tourists only see other tourists. Practically nobody is still living in Venice without having anything to do with tourists. So it is more likely a person from Zurich, my town, meeting another person from Zurich than a person from Venice. That is part of cultural over-tourism. Then there are long waiting lines in front of the museums and in front of the other things to be seen. And there are, in the economic parlance, negative external effects, the loss of authenticity, the loss of identity, the stress imposed both on the local population and on the and other visitors, the destruction of cultural values, the overuse, the pollution, and the ecological costs. Thus, there are really strong negative effects of cultural over-tourism. Now, as economists, we know that there are several countermeasures. One, protests. They are known to have happened in Barcelona, but also in Lisbon, and of course in Venice, where there's a movement saying no grande navi. They don't want to have any large ships any more in the Giudecca Canal, at least. Then there is information and appeals not to visit a certain city or a certain cultural heritage site at a certain time. Marketing efforts pointing out that there are less visited cultural sites. Marketing efforts, for instance, suggesting that lights are showing green or red when a site is overcrowded. Then government restrictions with respect to time or to the length of maybe historical site, a cultural site, or that parts of a site are closed for visitors. But of course, the real economic approach is pricing. To ask an entry price, for instance, for visiting Venice. However, it's not clear whether this really works for two reasons. First of all, the price must be quite high, because if somebody comes from China or from India or from a location further in the European north, the price of the entry is low compared to all the other costs, and therefore the effect will not be very strong. And if one asks a high price, let's say 50 euros per person entering, and a family of 4 wants to enter, the price is very high. It's an even better, something economists would really think is the right thing, is an auctioning mechanism, which takes into account when uh, which takes into account the situation more precisely than a fixed price. But the main point is that visitors are banned. People who like to visit a historical, a cultural site are not allowed to visit it, which is a loss, and I think we should take that into account. Therefore, I propose exactly the opposite, not to restrict demand, but to raise, to increase supply. And I call that revived originals. And there are two aspects. Some buildings of a historical site, let's take Venice, are replicated or copied absolutely identically and put in a new nearby site. In the case of Venice, it would be sufficient to do that with a Doge Palace, with St. Mark's Church, with St. Mark's Tower, and with the Rialto Bridge. That are the four buildings which almost everybody visiting Venice wants to look at and cherishes most. But the second aspect of revived originals must be that digital technology is strongly used. One aspect of this is scenography, which comes from the theater and which shows that space, sound, light, the environment and costumes can be presented by digital technology in a really supreme way. Holograms are one possibility to show people. For instance, in Venice, one could show the Doge, and people find it difficult or even impossible to distinguish between a real person and this hologram. Then one could use digital twins, and virtual reality, and 3D technologies. So digital technology is what revived originals distinguish basically from the original sites, and which are an added experience for the visitors. There are several similar sites today. For instance, Altamira, Lecco, and Scholl have prehistoric paintings, but which are in danger because of the exhaustion of the many visitors. So they have been closed. And in the case of Altamira, this was done in 1977. And in 2001, a replica was done, built nearby, just 500 meters away, and people still visit Altamira. We have big data on that. The fact that the real paintings can no longer be seen did not prevent people, tourists, to visit Altamira and to visit this replicated site. Then there is Neuschwanstein. It's visited by 1.5 million visitors per year. It is a medieval castle built in 1869. So it's not medieval at all, but it shows how a medieval castle could be or what most people think a historical medieval castle looks like. Of course, in the case of Neuschwanstein, there's an attraction related to King Ludwig II and Richard Wagner, which is attached to this kind of new historical buildings. In China, you see here Heidelberg down code in China. Now, there are several possible counter-arguments. First of all, is a perfect replication possible? This is a very, very old question between the original and the copy. But I think things have fundamentally changed since the digital technology has arrived. One example, even an earlier example, dating before the digital revolution, is the Campanile di San Marco. It was built in 911, but broke down completely and was rebuilt in 1902. But I believe that almost no visitors of Venice find any problem or even know that it is a replica. Here you see a replica of the Doors Palace in Macau. You see that it is very similar and it's difficult to distinguish it from the real Doors Palace in Venice. It is very, very often a perfect replication is much cherished. For instance, the Tutankhamun exhibition shows the graves of Tutankhamun, and it has been visited by 6,500,000 people already, which obviously liked it. And moreover, very often copies are taken as the normal thing. For instance, all the Roman copies of Greek originals are today taken as totally acceptable. And there is also a recent exhibition by a very famous museum, namely the Louvre Museum, namely showing Da Vinci's painting, and only the 39th painting in the exhibition was really done by Da Vinci. All the others were copies, but people didn't mind. The second question is, what about the missing atmosphere? But that has to do very much with a basic view of what is atmosphere. There are many examples, such as I mentioned, of the Tower, St. Mark's Tower, where the atmosphere is totally preserved. So it's not true a replication is not able to transform the atmosphere. There are certain problems with replications. This my suggestion of having revived originals. First of all, there must be a space, a suitable property, and there is likely to be political resistance because, of course, a lot of people, take the example of Dubrovnik or Venice, make a lot of money from the tourists visiting it, and they don't want to have competition. But I think it's possible to make the conclusion that basically it's possible not to overcome tourism, not by reducing demand, but increasing supply by perfect replication and digital technology. I certainly think that this is not always applicable and does certainly not solve all the problems of cultural over-tourism, but I think it is a new proposal which should be given a chance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. We wait 1 second for Bruno to join us because I see there are already a lot of questions, Bruno, for you. I was sure about that. I mean, it's an interesting topic, and of course, you provide quite an interesting twist to this topic. If you agree, Bruno, I will read the questions for you so that you can provide answers. So the first one is about cruise and the possibility that they will become less and less popular in the future. In fact, some new boats have been decommissioned. So what do you think about that? Do you think this will be like happening or not?
I don't think that this will happen. I think cruise ships are a very attractive way to visit various places. And as the population gets older, cruise ship will increase in importance, and that will be a problem, especially for Venice, but also for other places such as Dubrovnik.
There's another question, and more in general, how long you think that COVID will affect culture over tourism?
Not very long. I think it's already starting now. I recently visited Venice about 5 weeks ago, and it's already starting that more people are visiting Venice. At 5 weeks ago, it was mostly Italians. Now I know that a lot of Swiss people are already visiting Venice. So I think that it will pick up quite quickly, probably this summer, if the Delta variant doesn't destroy everything.
Okay, these were from Trine. Now we have a question from Elisabetta Lazzaro. Do you expect the pandemic to change the behavior and preferences of tourists?
Yes, dear Elisabetta, I hope that it will change it. That the original is not the only thing. What matters and what I propose is that people have the opportunity to really get engaged with a town or a historical site or a historical object. And if we take Venice, I think it's very important to see that those people who really want to see the original can still visit Venice as it is, but many people, I think, will prefer this minute type of site, the new original, the replicated original, because it is more attractive, especially for children and for people not very knowledgeable in the arts, because the presentation by digital means, by all sorts of virtual reality, by augmented reality, by holograms, is very attractive for a lot of people. And they might even come closer to Venice than it is today, where you only see a lot of tourists and have very little opportunity to really come into contact with Venice.
Thank you. Daniel Nordgaard suggests that there are already quite successful replicas of Venice, I think in China, and so they seems to be already quite successful. So it seems you're already ahead of time.
Yes, I know that there are several efforts to introduce virtual reality and augmented reality to show cultural objects. And I think in the economics of culture and in the economics of art, we should take that into account. And my proposal is different from Disneylands, as they are partly in America, in other countries, and in China, because I really want that the revived originals show the cultural objects in a new way and in a deeper way. So people are really immersed into things. And that's something which is not the case today in most replications.
I I have to apologize because maybe the names are not right, but I'm reading the chat on another chat. So apologies for this. So we have another question, but I'm not sure whether it's from Daniel Norgard or Andres Strakar, who ask, wouldn't be an interesting question to ask why we see overtourism at certain cultural destinations? It's tempting to suggest that these two can be seen in light of digitalization and challenges with discovery, especially perhaps the impacts of social media. Has any work been done on this?
Yes, there's quite a lot of work, but not in cultural economics. I think the media people are well aware that tourist flows are much influenced by what is said on LinkedIn or what is said on Twitter, etc., or on Facebook. I think there is a lot of research there, and I suggest that cultural economists should really try to pick that up.
Okay, then we have interesting suggestion. It seems there's a study in behavioral changes in tourism in times of COVID. And there's also like an example of in Japan when there's like something about historical Netherlands. Then a question is about suggestions. The replicas topic should be discussed from the perspective of particular segments type of tourists. So these are relation with mass culture tourists or people with a little interest in culture arts. The replica is not an option to large number of culture and audiences, I think.
I agree with this. The nice thing about my proposal, I think, is that you're still totally free, whether you visit the original Venice, for instance, or the revived original Venice. And I think a lot of people will prefer the new type of digitally produced Venice. For instance, in the real Venice, you cannot see how Venice looked like in the 14th or 17th century, while in my revived original, you can see that. There is a lot of research on that based on the archives in Venice, which are digitalized, and then they can really show how Venice was in the 14th century. And I think that's interesting, even for people that are cultured and have quite a lot of cultural knowledge. But who knows how Venice looked like in the 14th century? When you visit today, the city, that is definitely not the case.
That question was from Marcin Popraszki. And then Amin Kaksar, suggests that there might be other motivation for tourists than just visiting a particular place. So being physically is what prevents digitization in tourism sector, maybe.
Yes, there are many. I think you are absolutely right. There are very many different reasons why one visits a historical, cultural site, and that's very important to take that into account. One, which is important, is easy access. And that is not the case in many historical sites. There are huge queues, there are no restaurants, there are no hotels that at reasonable prices and things like that. And in my revived original, of course, that would be a very important consideration, that there are enough restaurants, good restaurants, enough hotels, and parking space for private visitors, very convenient very convenient access to public transport, and what is also important, no crime, because it's privately run, perhaps a public-private partnership, but it is well organized so that there won't be any crime and no organized professional commercial beggars.
Gerbenbacher asked whether anybody has tried to quantify the effects on reducing carbon emissions because of less travel, because this could have a massive impact on CO2 if people would travel closer to their home. So he wonders whether there's been studies.
I don't know of any empirical research which would really be able to identify this effect, but I agree it's an important effect. Thank you.
Stella asked whether historical and architectural value of heritage buildings derives from their site and place-based characteristics. Removing these ends of two caricatures of building, what is your opinion on this?
I disagree totally. It's not a caricature. It is exactly the same. When I wrote my two booklets on revived originals, I suggested that, for instance, the Doge Palace should be replicated well, and I meant that something like 20 centimeters. Then somebody, a specialist, wrote me that I'm totally wrong. Today, you can replicate the building to 1 millimeter. You know, things have changed through digital measurement and digital means. And I think we should take that into account. It's no caricature. It is like the original, exactly the same.
Carol asks, what do you think is the potential of redirecting tourism flows from overcrowded places instead to the periphery, that is to authentic but less known site, in order to deal with overcrowding? And he refers to a Horizon 2020 project where they deal with this. Yeah.
There have been serious efforts to redirect these flows, and I think that does make sense. But it's obviously not sufficient. As we all know, before the pandemic, cities like Dubrovnik or Mont Saint-Michel were totally overcrowded, though people were informed that there are similar places elsewhere, perhaps not exactly as beautiful, but very similar. I don't think that with appeals and information alone, you can really redirect the flows of cultural tourists to a sufficient amount, in a sufficiently well.
And Luis Cesar Prieto suggests historical parks are coming to the fore as a Disneyification of culture. And they are, according to him, a new tourist supply that wouldn't avoid over-tourism in the real ones.
Yes, I really hope that when we have these revived originals, that the old originals are less overcrowded. And that depends, of course, on the pricing. When let's take again Venice, because it's so obvious that in Venice you can ask an entry price. You cannot ask an entry price in Rome or in Venice, in Florence, because there are too many ways to enter the town. That's quite impossible. But you could do that in Dubrovnik, you could do that in Mont Saint-Michel, and you could do that in Venice. And if Venice, the old Venice, thinks that there are too many tourists, they can raise the price. And if the revived original nearby thinks that there are too few people coming, they can lower the price. So pricing the relative price really plays a role.
Juan Prieto Rodriguez asked, originality has been a value in Western art, but it has not been as important in Asia, where copies of the canon are very valuable. Therefore, replicas could work better in China or Japan than in America or Europe due to this cultural difference. What do you think?
That is a very, very nice point. When I was in China and in Japan, as a European, I very often asked, how old is this building? And then people looked at me and said, that's totally irrelevant, because we rebuild it every 10 or 20 or 30 years, I don't remember. But that is totally different in Asia and perhaps in other parts of our continent, of our world. I think we Europeans are a little bit too narrow in that. But I understand that art historians today have moved away from saying that is the real original and that is only a copy. Because what is an original? If you look at Da Vinci's wonderful painting of the Last Supper in Venice, is that still an original? It has been repainted over again and again and again, perhaps a copy. There are copies made after the original painting of Da Vinci are better than today's pseudo Da Vinci painting, which we can see now in this church. No, not in the church, in the where the monks ate.
Andrei Strakar asked whether could we expect any substitute in economic terms for tourism in the future?
Any what, sorry?
A substitute.
Yes, I think we must always look for substitutes. I think we should move away from saying there is only one thing. That's not economics. There are always many opportunities, alternatives, and we should look at that and not say that is totally wrong. There is only one thing in the world, namely the original. I think times have changed, especially because we can replicate paintings absolutely or in an original way. And as you know, there are many. There is now a movement where original art is digitalized and only protected by legal means, but it could be replicated in absolutely the same way all around. And I think we must take that into account when we do cultural economics.
There's a question during the conference. There have been various sessions talking about cultural value, and this session relates to that because Tal Feder suggests this raises very interesting questions about the link between cultural value and authenticity. Culture tourism in the age of technical reproducibility. Why should we suffice with historical replications? We can also think of historical forgeries that will be even better and more attractive than the originals. It's provoking you now.
That may well be. I wouldn't look at it as forgeries. They are just a replication, and the value individuals draw from a replication may be exactly as high, as good as the original. I want to point out that the Lascaux prehistoric paintings are now reproduced digitally in Paris in a museum, and people enjoy going there because the paintings are better seen, they are clearer, and even art historians like to look at them because they are better lit and they are in a better state than in the original cave.
It's interesting because Luis Cesar just suggests, the Altamira cave example, because it's an example well done, located in the same landscape with the National Museum aside, whereas the real cave is closed.
Yes, we have data on that. We thought that when the original Altamira was closed, that people wouldn't visit that anymore. And we find with the data, with actual data, and responses of in surveys that people enjoy the replicated Altamira quite a lot, and they don't mind so much that it is only a copy. So I very much agree with what happens in Altamira.
Then John O'Hagan suggests, sorry, it's going too fast, that you met around 30 years ago at a conference in Venice about the dangers of the city related to over-tourism and flooding. What, if anything, has changed since then? Do you think?
Thank you very much, John, for pointing that out. I didn't remember that. However, the number of visitors has grown tremendously over the last 30 years. As I tried to say there in my talk, there are now days in which there are 90 to 95,000 visitors per day. That is an incredible number. And 30 years ago, it was considerably lower, but I already found it overcrowded. And imagine if you have to visit Venice with 90,000 other persons, then you don't see much anymore. And somebody also told me that you can't even visit the Piazza San Marco when it is full. You have to wait until people leave. I think that has nothing to do with culture anymore. That has to do with over-tourism.
Browning code talk about again the issue of atmosphere authenticity, which seems to be central, and she suggests that the differences exist between people from different cultural backgrounds too in this respect. For instance, an Asian culture prizes replication as much as the original, as is a Chinese concept of food sipping, and she suggests also a site for that. So it's again these differences in.
Yes. Thank you very much for pointing that out again, that perhaps with what we Europeans and Americans and perhaps South Americans consider culture is somewhat different from how Asians look at it. And I think it's useful to take that into account, and I think we cultural economists should be more broad than today. Thanks.
Pedro Costa asked whether, do you think that this idea of revived original would apply also to intangible heritage?
What kind of intangible heritage? Yes,
Pedro?
probably yes, but I find it difficult to think about what it is exactly.
Well, it's unfortunately there's a double system here, so I don't know if Pedro is writing already, but I could think maybe about festival, you know, like music festival, religious festival, maybe, but I don't know. Really don't know. That's a different one, difficult one, Pedro.
Yes.
With intangible is difficult, really. May I ask you also something? Unless there are other questions, I jump in for 1 second, because I have two maybe a bit more down-to-earth questions. One is about the change in the tourism industry, because of course what we know about tourism so far, it's so beneficial because it allows also people with low education to get a job. But this would imply really a shift in the kind of professionals involved in the tourism sector, because in order, to provide revived originals, you need also high-skilled people. So do you think this is having a very big impact on, the people, the jobs, which then relate to tourism, but also with a crowding out somehow? Or do you think it would only add to that?
Anna, that's a very interesting question. I think the revived originals, to establish a revived original, you would have to have art historians, you would have to have very good architects, digital specialists, economists, and finances experts to build it up. And so I would rather look at it that there are new kinds of specializations needed, but I think that in the restaurants, in the hotels, in the shops that are nearby this revived original, many people will be employed quite similar to what is in the original.
And Pedro replied, so he was referring to community tradition when talking about intangible heritage. So we have an example, but it's difficult indeed to think. And Gerbenbacher also asked whether new tourism also be used to show things that do not exist anymore, like historical London or Paris or Tokyo, without all the new buildings and with many buildings that do not exist anymore.
That is a very, very nice and important point, and I think that's exactly true. I come back to Venice, I mean, there are some buildings in Venice that are not old and rather terrible, while built on the archives of Venice, you can now see how Venice looked in the 14th century. That is a great thing, and I think it's a positive thing. And we shouldn't say, we shouldn't contrast the original Venice with the revived Venice, but just say it's different. The new one presents things that the old one cannot present, and the other way around. I think it's more an addition than a substitution.
Very nice, because there's a debate in the debate going on in the chat. So Kazuko Goto suggests that originality has a value in Japan too. And even if they rebuild shrines, for instance, sometimes, the purpose is different, because there's also like, it refers to the conservation of inherited skills of buildings. So she doesn't really agree with the idea that in the Eastern continent, originality is not valued. That's an interesting debate. Can I add maybe one or two questions? Would you say then that we could think that there's also a shift from tourism to something which is more related to entertainment? You know, with this involvement, the example you were giving me. Sorry, I have some background information because we had a nice chat before.
I do think that the revived originals are better entertainment also. But that's what people like, and especially younger people who are perhaps not as cultured, as cultural and art economists are, and who do not know so much about history. I think they like entertainment and a good presentation. And I think historical knowledge is not everybody has a lot of historical knowledge. Let me cite one instance, namely how the Doge of Venice was elected. And that is extremely interesting. It is about 5 or 6 steps in which there was a vote, and then a purely decision by lot or by chance, and then again a decision by vote, and then again chance, and then again vote. And that's very interesting to see. And when you go to Venice today, you at best hear that the election of the Doge was complicated, but in my revived original, you could sit in the Senate and really experience how this was done. So I think it's just another thing. And I would really say that even people who know quite a lot about culture can still learn something in this digitally produced revived original.
And but what about the cost of all this? Because, you know, dealing with cultural heritage, that's one of the questions, you know, when you talk about digitization, replica, of course, this would drag quite a lot of resources.
Very important question, yes. I don't know about the cost. I was asked several times whether I would undertake such an enterprise to do a revived original, but I think that must be done by an entrepreneur that is really engaging and unorthodox, And we see that in many places, including Paris and in the United States and Canada, Disney worlds could be established. My proposal is not a Disney world, but it offers a lot of attractions to many different visitors.
Okay, no, there's the debate going on. We have a few minutes. I don't know if I can add a small, I don't know if it's a reflection or a question again, because it's very interesting, Bruno. We started the conference with Eleonora Belfiore showing a document from the UK Treasury, which was like named Building Back Better. In your paper, you refer to a document of the World Tourism Organization, which is named Grow Back Better. I don't know. I mean, for me, it's very intriguing. I was listening to, I was reading something about The Economist that is trying to develop a sort of normality index. What is your idea? You know, can we really get back better? Or is your suggestion to go further and forget about the back? I don't know if I can ask you, because this has been also, you know, COVID and the effect of COVID have been a leitmotif related to all aspects of culture. You're focusing on tourism, but I think a small reflection on this probably would be very interesting to hear from you.
I think we can go back better because technology has been advanced, and at the same time, this technology can offer us additional insights. So it's a nice combination. Of course, I would certainly agree that the revived original also has some disadvantages. Everything has disadvantages and advantages. And we economists should try to see both sides. And if somebody thinks that the revived originals are very bad, they should also look at what happens in a place like the Louvre with so many visitors per day. And I think the negative aspects there, including a possible destruction of the originals because of the many exhaustions from people, should also be taken into account.
Okay. I thank you, Bruno, very, very much. It's been inspiring, but also challenging. And I think the intensity of questions showed that. I hope that I could make justice of all the questions. I apologize if I didn't to all our audience. I thank you all for participating in this very interesting talk. And well, I wish to see you all soon and wish you a good continuation of the conference. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you very, very much.
Anna, I thank you. You are a wonderful chairwoman. All the best to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.